Thank you guys so much. We are working our way through our Seeing Through Gebser series. Today, we have finished the last chapter, which was the unique character of the structures. And today, we are going into the space-time constitution of the structures. Cool stuff. We're going to learn how time is interpreted or externalized throughout the structures. So if you think, here's a good example. Take Foucault. What Foucault was doing was he was analyzing the different conceptions of madness through different epochs of time, say the Renaissance or what are they? I can't remember what he called it, but of course it's a meta narrative. That's not the point. So Foucault is saying, look, what we call mad nowadays was the normal mode of being, the normal way of viewing the world in the past, 3, 4, 500 years ago. So of course he would follow on this to say that all knowledge is a social construct in lieu of power and postmodernity. Cool. Think about what's happening though. Madness has changed the conception of madness throughout time. Why is that conception of madness changed? What's really happened is the conception of madness has changed via the structures. So each different structure has a new idea of madness. So the magical consciousness structure's idea of madness, or a disability, let's say more broadly, is of course everything in magic is unity. So you have done something to disunite yourself, or you have not acted in unity or in harmony with the magical forces of the world, and therefore you have earned and deserve your disability, whatever that may be. That's the magical structure's conception of madness, and of course it's conducive to the magical structure. That's how objects in the world are brought into the relation with each other in the magical structure. Then of course you would find a similar thing in myth. With myth, of course, you get to start seeing these religions. So all of a sudden we had God. You must have done something to upset God. That's why you're being punished in the form of this disability or madness. That's why you're mad. But then, of course, later on, when the mental consciousness structure forms, all of a sudden we start taking a more scientific approach. Now there's something wrong with your brain or your psyche or something, and it is not necessarily you being out of harmony or unity with the magical forces of the world. We don't believe that in 2025. It's also not because, at least not in America, it's also not because God has done something to you've done something to piss God off, and now God is sort of reflecting that back and just kind of giving you what you deserve. We don't really believe that either. Now we believe it's neurosis. Now we believe it's chemical imbalance or something, or we think it's because of childhood trauma. So that's what's going to be happening here. Time is the same way. So time in the magical structure is going to be different than time in the mythical structure and time in the mental structure. Now, knowing the character of the structures, if you followed this series so far, as I'm doing this lecture, or maybe if you want to pause, I want to challenge you guys, give you guys a pop quiz. Now, I want you guys to think how time is understood throughout these structures. If you need to write it down or just keep it in your head and see if it lines up. But don't beat yourself up if you don't get it right, because this is really difficult stuff. And I mean, I wouldn't have got it right either. So with all that, let's just get into it, right? So in this section, in this video, we're going to be doing, this is called, well, I'm going to spoil the question I just asked you, but this one is called the space-timelessness of the magic structures. That's what we'll be getting into today. We'll do this video, we'll do magic structure, the next we'll do mythical, then we'll do mental. Mental might take twice because that's a little more. So let's get right into it. He says, whenever we speak of space and time, we must remember that these are concepts worked out by our consciousness, concepts which are the primary constituents of consciousness and make possible its effectuality. Very important. At the point of departure from this achievement was space-timelessness, and this space-timelessness, which we have attempted to render comprehensible as being characteristic of the magic structure, which is indeed of basic and decisive import for this structure, this space-timelessness is not amenable to depiction or representation. Repeat. This space-timelessness is not amenable to depiction or representation. To represent or depict is to spatialize something. Space is what? Of course, that's the mental structure. But how are we to render something spaceless in spatial terms unless we forego its non-spatial character? So, don't get too lost and don't get too frustrated if you are not having a perspective, mental, abstract, conceptual understanding of this. The space-timelessness is almost impossible in our modern day to truly attain And then even if you do, there's going to be a problem he's about to explain. But don't get lost. So the space-timelessness, it's really difficult to um, depict or represent this. The best, I'd assume the best is just going to be a white or black screen. That would kind of be it. It's very difficult to sort of rationally account for. We're compelled accordingly to look for another procedure. We could, for example, attempt to evoke or invoke or conjure up the pre-rational events, an approach which we suggested earlier. This would result in our being transported back to the magical state where we could experience it. But it would also mean that upon re-emerging from the state, we would be unable to give any account of it, since the somnolent excuse me, the somnolent, trance-like state of this consciousness, which, with its weakly developed awareness, would have sufficiently infected or lowered our own awareness that we cannot count on its deliberative capacity. So what that's saying is, if you were to sort of suspend the self, the ego, the I, and revert back to this magical unity and attain that space-timelessness, what would happen is it would be so foreign to you and it would be so out of the ordinary that when you come back to conscious emergence and you're back to like, okay, I'm me, Justin, I live in this world and I have a sense of I, um, the events that you will have experienced are so ineffable, so so different and so out there. It's essentially a numinous experience that it would be impossible to sort of give this very detailed, accurate, rational accounting of what happened. So you forego all your rational faculties, you descend down to the magical consciousness structure and that space timelessness. The problem is when you come back up, now you're in the world of space and time. Space time can't really rationally account for that experience. So in theory, you could do suspension of the rational ego and descend into the magical space timelessness, but it wouldn't really be worth anything too much because you wouldn't learn anything, you wouldn't retain anything, you wouldn't attain anything. You would just have that experience and it would probably mess you up, especially if you have no way of rationally accounting for it. So keep that in mind. We would have had an emotional experience, it is true, but would be unable to account for what actually happened, not to mention being able to make any kind of judgment on it. It says, for as long as we merely point to the deficient manifestations of this basic phenomenon, we have accomplished little towards its clarification. Let us then disregard here the deficient manifestations of today's machine magic, such as the effects of the radio with its almost space-timeless functioning and its exclusive tie to the auditive, which indicate its magic roots, just as the imagistic effects of the cinema are an indication of its mythical source. So this is what I'm talking about in the previous videos in this series. Look out for these little things. So when you have the radio in an earlier video in this series, the radio Gebser categorized as being a manifestation of magical space timelessness. That's what he said. Remember, he said technology is less a good or bad. It shouldn't be considered necessarily rationally. What technology is a restructuration of consciousness to reattain the space timelessness of the magic consciousness structure, which in turn conferred a strong unity. And now he's picking up on that. He's saying the radio is this, and you can see this because it's auditory. And of course, that was the privileged organ, the ear, which opened up the world. The world was sort of first filtered through the ear, the magic man. They had to attune themselves to the hums, the hymns of the world of nature. And you can see that now in radio. So even something that is you would probably normally consider to be a rational manifestation has its roots in the magic structure. Same thing with mythology and images. Of course, if I'm watching a film, which I'm about to after this, I'm watching moving images. Well, imagination, that's myth. Let's see. Deficient applications or effects of the magic structure will not furnish us with information about the efficacy of space timelessness. We're also going to get into something pretty cool in this section. So we're going to be talking about, I should have looked it up. We're going to talk about the miracles at Lourdes, Lourdes. I should have looked it up. I feel uncultured even mispronouncing it. But the miracles back in the day at the Lourdes, or the healings of Lourdes, I apologize. We're going to be getting into that. It's going to be some very interesting stuff. Now, the rationalists, They won't take this seriously at all. But we are not rationalists. We have transcended that, so we will take this seriously. So to discover this efficacy, we must turn to a positive manifestation. So we're going to see a positive manifestation of the magic consciousness structure. We have noted in an earlier context a phenomenon which could not be explained on a rational basis by rational means, namely the miraculous healings of Lourdes. Fuck the French. Oh, it's ruining everything. In that connection, we quoted a remark by the physician Alexis Carrel, who observed that, quote, the only condition indispensable to the occurrence of the phenomenon of healing is prayer, unquote. We also pointed out that certain aspects for which we had then no explanation could be designated as being akin to communion. So we're going to be learning about prayer and its positive manifestation, its effective manifestation, not just this sort of, I'm praying that I'm praying it rains so my soccer practice is canceled and I could talk to my seventh grade girlfriend. That's not what we're talking about. He says, we have seen that prayer is a magic form of manifestation in addition to being a communio, that is, a being one with, genuine prayer, which is an outgrowth of a need and is not therefore purpose or goal oriented. That's the rational prayer, right? The rational prayer is, I need a good grade on this test so I can get into college, and then I'll get a good job, and then all that. So God, give me the strength to empower me with your intelligence so I can pass algebra 2. I've even done this, even though I'm not particularly a Christian. Hopefully, if things go well, I'm going to have a daughter here soon, and I've certainly prayed, whether to God or the spirits, that she is okay, and that if anything were bad to happen to her, it would transfer that sort of to me. It might work, it might not, but the problem is it's goal oriented, and this is where Gebser is going to sort of pick it apart. So it's not purpose or goal oriented. It has the nature and function of communion. That's positive prayer. It restores the inceptual unity or oneness, the absorption of the suppliant or suppliant, and prayer is an immersion into the natural unity of everything in the state at the moment. The individual is, as it were, extinguished and forms a true unity with the hundreds of others who are united with him in prayer. So he's about to explain this more in detail, but prayer works because the ego, the I, the me, gets put aside and it descends and it descends and it descends into the magical unity so that the ego and the sense of I doesn't even exist anymore. There is really no differences, of course, because that was conferred by the mental structure, but that's gone. So you sort of descend into this very immeasurable mode of being or existence, and then the prayer sort of happens, and then you rise back up. He says, in this location itself, Lord, where the healing takes place is of decisive importance. Its mythical configuration, to which we shall return in a moment, makes possible the transition from the diurnal wakeful awareness via the dreamlike mythical consciousness to the weakly conscious somnolent and trance-like state of magic space-timelessness. So it's important. It's important that these things happen in a particular place. It can't happen in my room or in front of my Blu-ray shelf. It has to happen in a place of mythical, magical, and spiritual significance where people are taking things seriously, not doing you're too cool for school. None of this is going to work. Yeah, it's not going to work if you have that attitude. The magic mythical configuration of Lord is evident on the one hand in the primordial aspect of the grotto, the sheltering cavern, on the other in the figure of the saint, the protectress and great mother, and also in the source from which the living water springs forth. So we're seeing these manifestations. And living water springs forth. We're actually going to talk about in the next section. Water is a soul, or is a symbol for life, or even soul, but we'll get into that. These are all magic and psychic fundamentals administered by the church in the name of the one God. The healing process, here it is. So this is the prayer. So he's about to describe what happened when people went into the Lord and engaged in the magic in there and felt the positive aspects or results of effective magical prayer. This is what happens when the person descends. The healing process, the healing process is a descent whereby the believer in the one God descends down to the darkness of the source ruled over by the sheltering mother. A descent to the unity, quote unquote, below, where the individual loses his individuality and is united with everything. when the diurnal or wakeful consciousness is sufficiently depressed so that the surroundings are no longer present to the suppliant, and he sinks, quote unquote, sinks even deeper, where even the psychic reality of dream and image vanish. His individuality is obliterated in the magic realm of the grotto or cavern. So as the self diminishes, of course, we're obliterating the mental conscious structure and the ego. That's dissolving. But notice this. Even the psychic reality of dream and image vanish, says Gebser. So even the mythical consciousness structure, which of course would mutate after the magic. So if we're descending from mental to magical, we're tossing out mental, but it also makes sense that we would toss out mythical too. So it's this complete unity with world. There is no really a sense of I. The individual is gone. The ego's gone. Let's see. Individuality is obliterated in the magic realm of the grotto or cavern, and he becomes one with the unity to which all differentiation is unknown. There, spatial boundaries and temporal limits are suspended. One thing affects the quote unquote other with which it is united. Individual organs, even individual afflicted organs, are effaced in our, say, henceforth hand or arm, inasmuch as the hundreds of arms and hands are now undifferentiated and unbounded, comprising one arm and one hand. So think of it like think of it like a drop of water. So let's say we have a sink, and the sink is the drain is clogged. So of course, when I have the water flow down, the sink's just going to fill up with water. So let's say I put the spigot down, but I don't do it enough. Now, you know how the sink can just drop little drops of water, just like that. That's what this is. So we have individual drops of water dropping down into the sink, which is full of water. Once the individual droplet drops into the body of water, its individuality is eliminated and it is subsumed within the unity of the water in the sink. Same thing with prayer. Um, it's very difficult to pick up that droplet of water or just scoop one out and say, I found it. Well, how can you be sure this is the one, right? It's been subsumed. So think of it like that. The power of natural healing, and because of the vital need, it is efficient strength, not the deficient might of magic which responds. So he seems to be suggesting that the efficient magic comes about out of need, and it comes about out of moral desire to do good. Deficient magic is power. Nietzsche's will to power. I want power. I'm Judge Holden. I don't care about it. The freedom of birds is an insult to me. I'd have them all in zoos. Nothing exists. Nothing. Anything that exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. That kind of thing. We don't want that. That, of course, obviously, really is one of the key sources of all the terrible things humans do. You don't want that. Which the individual body is unable to summon for the afflicted organ is marshaled by the unity of all organs. So the power of natural healing, which the individual body is unable to summon for the afflicted organ, is marshaled by the unity of all organs. So the individual will not be able to heal himself. That's not how it works. But once the droplet of water becomes water and is unified with the larger body, that's a different story. Now the healing energies and sort of spirits are simply transferred. And then if one part of the body transfers, it doesn't lose any of its substance. It remains sort of perfect. The power which was individually lacking in the afflicted hands flows from the healthy hands with which they are united. A unifying flux, a communion streams through and equalizes this unity of those united in prayer who recover as a single body. Of itself, nature furnishes the equilibrium to this organism of suppliance, which has become a unit, an equilibrium that the individual organism was no longer able to establish. When the suppliant reemerges from the depths of meditation and returns to his rational wakeful consciousness, he brings along from the magic depths his recovery and health. So as the group descends and they lose their individuality, and now he mentions that multiple times. He says loses their individuality. Why does he mention that? Because remember, the magical consciousness structure, everything is about unity. There's no individual here. Everything is connected. So it makes sense that in efficient magic, you would have to descend and get rid of the ego, right? Because it wasn't there. And if we're going to go back to the magical consciousness structure, it's not going to do well with the rational ego or rational sense of I. So that's the key point. It's a communal thing, and you must kill the ego in order for these kind of prayers to work. He says, such places as Lourdes are truly religious, for they establish the religio, the bond to the past, which in this case extends back to our beginnings in the magic structure. Let this example suffice to illustrate the efficacy of space-timelessness to those who are able to free themselves from the confines of rational rigidity without necessarily plunging into the depths of irrationality. So that's a beautiful way of putting it. One, this is the efficient aspect of magic. And he, as you can tell, he believes the healings did happen. Of course, Gebser isn't a rationalist, so he has no reason to believe that these didn't happen. He believes that absolutely did happen. But notice what's happening here. We're going back to engage with irrationality or even pre-rationality, and yet we're not being enslaved to it. We're not necessarily, we're keeping one foot in rationality, right? So that we're achieving that balance. So instead of having 2 feet in the rational camp, we put one in the rational camp and one back in the magic, just so we don't lose our footing, right? So we don't, it's good to engage with the irrational and pre-rational within us on our own terms. It's terrible. It's wholly destructive if you were to enslave yourself to those whims or those aspects of the human condition. You don't want to do that. All right. He says this particular example is perhaps successful in quote unquote describing the effect of space-timelessness, and yet it must not be overlooked that the healing processes that take place at Lourdes can also be interpreted in other ways. But however they are interpreted, their principal character is one of proximity to the quote unquote state of space-timelessness. It is generally recognized that the irrational and pre-rational nature of these cures, which occur in the non-measurability of space-timelessness, has enabled the modern rational sciences to speak of occult or parapsychic phenomena. So some occult phenomena is just the purging or the manifestation of the powerful and potent psychological aspects of a person. So maybe you just have a person who just has a whole bunch going on inside and they've been restrained, and then all of a sudden this occult phenomena is just all this wave of emotion and feeling getting out. But he's saying sometimes it's real. All right, let's see. He says the psychic participation inconscient is indicative, so the prayer is indicative of a process which occurs far removed from space and time, but which leaves its visible imprint nonetheless in the spatially and temporally bound body. This one instance of process, which can be described in parapsychological terms, may be sufficient in itself, but there are numerous others. All such phenomena interpreted along the lines of a parapsychology, however, are liable to the danger of a psychology misinterpretation, particularly because a mostly misconstrued magic element plays a decisive part in such interpretations, an element which is beyond the grasp of psychic experience. So it's really difficult when you see these occult phenomena you have to respect the magical element. You have to respect that space-timelessness. You cannot just say, oh, that person just has problems and now they're letting it out and they've been restrained. It is possible, but you come to that conclusion by incorporating the space-timelessness of the magic structure. Once you've delved into that and you just go, okay, yeah, this doesn't apply here, then you can do that, but don't do that. Let's see. Okay, such phenomena remain one-sided whenever they are explained in a psychologizing manner. We are, however, interested in the condition and process in their entirety, and for this reason the example of Lourdes can serve for all similar and identical instances. Moreover, the nature of prayer has furnished a convenient and unquestionable point of departure. A conscious reversion to the effectivity of the magic structure, which in fact occurs hour by hour in us, sustaining us as proof of its power, would make quote-unquote sense, if we lived in the mental structure, only if it led us to expect a strengthening of the direction of our lives in the mental structure. So the only thing the rationalists, when they view this stuff, they just go, it doesn't make sense. And the only way it would make sense is essentially that if the recognition of this sort of phenomena as true or real increase their ability to think rationally and logically. Okay, everything with the rationalists, I feel to say it again, they are inherently limited. And I'm going to do another video in my Kill Rationalism series about what rationalists think are profound. Rationalists will point to a brain scan, point to a part of the brain and say, well, this part has a function in the world. Yes, thank you. Nothing about soul, nothing about spirit, nothing about any of that. Just don't get me started. Let's see. But such is rarely the case. To the mental structure, the magic appears to be mostly chaotic. Whenever it breaks into consciousness, it subordinates consciousness to its might, thereby not strengthening consciousness so much as confounding it. For this reason alone, the rational defenses vis-a-vis the magical are justified. Everything depends on the individual's constitutional bent and whether he is able to see through the variegated texture in which he is at once seeding, flower, and fruit. Um, so of course the mental structure is always going to have a problem with the magic structure and the mythical structure, because the magic structure, as he said, it will subsume and it will completely overwhelm the ego. When done in a manner that is not careful, you will run into problems. Okay, I think he's going to talk about it. Um, he says there is some risk in speaking of such manners, for at the very least they endanger the quote unquote soul, and every peril is either a demise or an enduring experience. The experience of where the magic structure begins and how it works must be made by every person individually, and the peril lies quote unquote behind the experience and threatens anyone unprepared with the loss of self. So this is why, now I've never done this. This is why when you take DMT or you do ayahuasca or you're doing some sort of weird spiritual stuff, they will always tell you you need to have a guide. You need to be very, 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 very careful what's happening, because I think what they're getting at, even though they might not to be express it in these terms, is that the magic consciousness structure will return with a vengeance. It will completely subsume your sense of self, your ego, and your sense of rationality. Though you don't want to be a rationalist, you don't want to get rid of any of those things. You want to balance them and keep them healthy. That's a good thing. Um, but I think that's what people are getting at when they say that when you're about to take ayahuasca or DMT. Like, just be careful, okay? Because there are aspects of the human condition that are so opposed to what you have been living your entire life that it will essentially create a numinous experience for you, but it will do so in a way that is destructive, and it will kill you almost in a literal sense. It could drive you crazy. You can go invalid, you can go wild. So always be very careful when you do that. Now if you're doing shrooms or something like that, that's probably one thing, but if you're doing like some of these hard stuff, again, I've never done these. That's what I think they're getting at when they warn you, because I always thought like, well, why don't I do that? That could be fun. And then every time I brought it up, they'd be like, yeah, don't do that. I'm like, oh, okay. He just flat out says someone unsure of himself should not approach or be led into these matters. Now, even as someone who loves Gebser and who likes this stuff, I don't even know if I would do that. Or at the very least, I would do it with a guide, because especially, I mean, I don't want to get too into my personal life, but I've had some mental health problems, and that's always been kind of like a worry for me about kind of descending into myself a little more. Well, am I going to um, recreate the conditions that were so terrible for me for a long part of my life? I don't want to do that, and I'm having a good life now, and I've got a lot of knowledge and stuff, so maybe it's not worth the risk, but who knows? I'm only 28. Maybe in 20 years I'll change my mind. For this very reason, we have referred to the well-known example of Lud. I don't know how you pronounce it. It cannot be treated exhaustively, for within the magic structure which we have touched upon here, a dense network of associations begins where everything commences to coincide with everything and everyone else. A situation extremely dangerous for the rational consciousness. Remember, rationality operates on distinctions: subject, object, self, world, essence, appearance. Once you get rid of that and you don't have a firm grasp of what it is you're replacing it with, i.e. the magical structure, you are going to have problems. I just don't know what to say. You have to be very careful. So if you guys, I'm not trying to beat them up, but if you guys know who What If Althist, What If Althist, really smart guy. I watch a lot of his history videos just because I don't know much about history and I want to learn. He recently has kind of went off the deep end a little bit. He took ayahuasca. He did not take Gebser's warning seriously, and now he has gone. I hate to say this, he's gone a little insane. And I feel bad for him. And he had trauma in his life too, and now he's spilling that all out on the internet in a very kind of unhealthy way. So if you end up watching this, I'm rooting for you. But read Gebser, everyone. Moreover, here we approach the powerful attraction of the earth from which every supplication tries to flee. Now, he says, attraction of the earth from which every supplication, and then parentheses, flehen, F-L-E-H-E-N, tries to flee, F-L-I-E-H-E-N, fleehen. again, the etymological connections that Gebser makes here are just amazing to me. But one can escape a force, and this is the quote unquote secret, only by passing through it. Other forms of this quote unquote passage are the alchemistic unificatio, the chemisch, Chymische, Hossiet, of the Rosicrucians, and many others, and the decisive role of magic spaceless timelessness is not limited only to them. But now let us leave the spaceless, timeless world, which our rational, awakened consciousness finds so disquieting, and turn to the world characterized by temperament, disposition, and courage, by the pulse of the heart, and by the mute as well as singing mouth, that is, the world of myth and its incipient temporicity. Notice the word temporicity. The mythical structure does not have time. Time comes about the mental structure. I want you to try to guess what the difference is between magical understanding of time, mythicals and mentals, and then integrals. So that's where we'll leave it today. You guys are the best, as always. I love you guys. Be very careful if you're doing this sort of spiritual finding yourself and you're descending. You need to be very, very, very careful. And hopefully you guys had a little bit a newer respect for prayer and what that is. I didn't quite understand what prayer was. I always viewed it as this sort of a petition to the gods or God, and it either happens or it doesn't, or he either involves himself or he doesn't, or he doesn't exist, so he doesn't involve himself. But no, the real prayer, efficient magic prayer, is exactly that: it's the destruction of the ego, descending down to the unity of the self, and then the energy, the healthy energies of the body, so to speak, simply transfer within itself, and then everyone reemerges healthy and happy. What else? Space timelessness, that's magic, very difficult to understand. But now that you have a mental understanding of it, that is better than nothing. So it does prepare you a little bit. So next week or later on, we're going to be going through the mythical temporicity. That's going to be fun. And then after that, we'll be doing mental, and then we'll just keep on working through. You guys are the best. I love you guys. Watch my new video on kill rationalism. I actually I did that because I went back and rewatched my first video, and it's not my best. A lot of rambling, a lot of half points made that would become whole points 30 minutes later, and it was okay. It's there's nothing like I didn't say anything crazy in there, but it's not my best work. So I did something else. I'm going to be doing a new series called Kill Rationalism. I'm going to be talking about how rationalism is manifesting in all aspects of our society. So if you guys are interested, if you guys have any video ideas or maybe book recommendations or whatever, just let me know. I love talking to you guys. And I hope you guys are thriving. All right. Let me know if you guys want to talk. Okay. Be safe. Thrive.